Alright everyone, welcome back to part 4 in this series. Today we're going to take a look at how I draw bodies and how I tackle anatomy. It might not be the most informative video just because my process isn't exactly the most coherent, I guess. I have been drawing for a long time, and at this point I've gotten pretty comfortable with drawing bodies, and I'm pretty comfortable with anatomy. And with my style and how the anatomy translates in my style. So for me, the way that I draw bodies is not really broken down into easily digestible steps. I kind of just draw until I'm happy with the way that it looks, which is not necessarily the right way to do it, and of course this is art. There really isn't a right or wrong way to do anything, but there are more efficient ways to do things, and mine is not the most efficient way, but it is what I am comfortable with. Again, the point of this series is not to teach you how to draw, it's just to show you how I personally draw. And this is how I do it. Now, just to clarify, I'm not going to be touching on hands or feet or clothing at all in this video. I'm just going to be talking about the meaty bits, just the main portion of the body. So from shoulders to the ankles, hands and feet I feel like are a whole other topic that deserves their own video, so that will follow this video next week. So without too much rambling, let's go ahead and jump into it. Alright, so here we have this character drawing that we've been working on throughout this series, but as with the other videos, before I jump right into drawing on this piece, I'm gonna actually go back to the poses that we started with in the very first video, and I'm gonna do some example sketching on those drawings. Alright, so here I have the original gesture sketch that we did for the pose that we ended up choosing, and I have all of the other poses in this file as well. And I think I'm going to use a couple of these as examples, because the way that I draw bodies and the way that I work on anatomy is kind of just drawing and drawing and drawing until I'm happy with it, which is not the most helpful sometimes, certainly not the most informative, so I'm going to do it a couple times and hopefully you guys will get something out of this. Alright, so I think I'm going to go ahead and start with this one. This one is pretty simple and it's not that far off from the pose that we ended up going with, so I feel like this is a good place to start. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a red color because the base sketch is blue, and I'm going to go ahead and turn down the opacity on this layer, make myself a new layer. And again, if you're working traditionally, this is where you could just take your eraser and erase some of the lines a little bit just to kind of lighten them. That way it's a little bit easier to see what you're working with. So, make sure I have the right pencil. Now, I always start top to bottom, so the first thing I start drawing are the shoulders, which makes sense. Generally, you want to start from top to bottom because that's just kind of the way that most people's brains work, but if you wanted to start down here, go for it. I don't see why you would, but do whatever you want to do. I usually start right around the shoulders and the neck. First thing I'm going to do is draw the neck because that's going to be the part that helps us find the center of the body. So we're not worrying about a face, obviously. We've already done all that, and I'm not going to add a face to all of these drawings. But we have our neck. So about here is where the center of the body will be. And this shoulder is slightly back, so it's going to be kind of arched upwards just a little bit. And this one actually as well, since the arm is coming out and holding something up maybe in their hand. So from the shoulders, I start coming down, and again, the way that I draw bodies is just kind of drawing lines over and over and over again until I'm happy with them. I have drawn for my entire life, so I do have a lot of experience, and at this point I've gotten pretty comfortable with drawing things like anatomy, so it's kind of like a muscle memory thing for me, and once you do it enough, it'll be the same for you too. So unfortunately, I don't really have the brain to explain the the rules and the fundamentals of what I'm doing. I'm just hoping that if I do it a couple times and explain what my thought process is, maybe that'll be useful to you. One tip that I do have when it comes to drawing bodies is make them curvier than you think they need to be. This helps keep your drawings from looking really stiff, which it's okay if you have an art style that maybe is a lot more angular and sharp. Mine is very flowy, so in order to kind of match that style, I make sure that most of my lines are curved even slightly. So even though the arm is generally like a straight thing, like your forearm here, there is going to be a little bit of curve because there is flesh on the bone. Ew, I hate the word flesh. But because there is something covering the bone that is not bone, there's usually a little bit of a curve to it, and that helps kind of indicate like a soft material, if that makes sense. Let's see, so right off the bat, I can tell that this arm is a little bit too long, and that's kind of one thing that I find happens often when I draw directly over like a gesture sketch like this, because the gesture sketch was not meant to be like proportionally accurate, right? It's kind of just meant to give you an idea of where you're going. So what I do is I'll sketch over it, and once you start adding like the actual flesh and like the details and the features, it becomes a little bit easier to tell if something is off. And with my eyes, I can tell that this arm is much too long. Basically, let me stand up and reference my own body. So basically when I'm drawing the arms, I think I usually want them to come to about here. It's different for everybody, but if I were to take this arm, unfold it, and bring it all the way down, it would be much too long because it looks like it would come down to here, and that's even without the hand added. So we want to try to visualize the length of the arm and bring it to about here at most. Like imagine these are the hands, and that feels about right. Because most people, if you put your hands to your thighs, they're not going to reach your knees. I don't know if anybody was ever dress coded in school for maybe like the length of their shorts, but if you remember, your fingertips aren't going to go super far down your legs. So that kind of helps you keep your length in check, if that makes sense. So really quickly here, if you're feeling super unsure about proportions and how tall your character should be and how long their limbs should be, it can be super helpful to refer to the 8 heads rule. This is something that kind of came up around the Renaissance, and you've probably seen it, you've probably heard of it at least. Basically, the rule is that most people are anywhere from 7 to 8 heads tall. So if you take the head and put it next to the character and stack it, it should be anywhere between 7 and 8 heads tall. Of course, the way that I draw is very stylized, so it's not going to be the most accurate to real life proportions, which is why I don't usually fall back on this rule a whole lot. I don't usually think too hard about this because things aren't going to line up exactly correctly. But for those of you who are just feeling like really unsure about the proportions, this is a very helpful visual to have. So I will link a few videos in the description that will go more in depth on this process and how this can help you. But I just wanted to put this here in case anybody was still feeling a little bit uneasy, because this video obviously is just how I draw personally, and it's not going to be super helpful if you are completely unfamiliar with where to start when drawing proportions and bodies. So hopefully that helps a little bit. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and just shorten this a little bit. Obviously, if you're working traditionally, you can kind of just erase and adjust as needed. But for the sake of this video not being too long, I'm going to use those digital art cheats, so to speak. And again, because we're not really worrying about hands in this video, I'm just gonna go ahead and draw like a little mitten in place of a hand. So that feels about right for now. It might even still be too long, too big, but we're gonna keep working because we haven't done the rest of the body. Again, there's a lot of adjusting happening when I'm drawing bodies, so a lot of the times I'll make adjustments, move on to another part of the body, come back and look at it as a whole and realize that I need to make even more adjustments. And that's just part of the process. So we know that her body's kind of twisted or bent in a way. Like she's kind of almost front facing this way, and then one leg is going to be coming in front of the other here. So another thing that helps when drawing like the torso, for example, again, keeping things slightly curved. Even if you don't have a very curvy character, that's fine. Just make sure that there's a little bit of a curve to your lines so it keeps the drawing loose and flowy. One thing that helps with the torso is kind of imagining clothes. So, for example, like where the hips would start, or where there would be like, maybe they're drawing, or maybe they're wearing a bathing suit. I kind of draw that in, and that helps me just a little bit, imagining like a bit of a bathing suit bottom here. And then moving upward, I'm imagining a belly button right about here. And that kind of helps us decide where our hips are and where the thigh is going to be coming from. And the legs, I definitely keep very curvy. Now, I'm not an expert, okay? So don't come for me. I don't draw these poses often. I don't even know what I'm trying to say. Just trying to have an excuse for maybe taking a while to get this down. I'm gonna go ahead and at this point flip the canvas. So this leg is looking a little bit too straight for me because what it's doing is it's coming out a little bit and then bringing the foot to where it's facing us more. So it's kind of turning as it's coming out, and it's a little bit tricky to portray that sometimes. But one way you can is by, your knee is right about here, and the thigh is gonna have a little bit of a curve outward and then inward just before the knee. And then right about here is kind of where the widest part of the calf is, just below the knee. So you're gonna kind of show that other side of the calf on this side of the knee before it comes back in, kind of over that femur. Hopefully that's the right bone that I just mentioned. I don't know anatomy. I'm not a doctor, I'm an artist. And then, again, we are not worrying about feet, so you can kind of just draw whatever shape you want to indicate a foot. Now the back leg is also going to be a little tricky here. So this hip, I believe, is going to be up a little bit higher than this one. This one is where the body's weight is, where all of that weight is resting, which is kind of important to note, but I don't really, let's see. The good thing is, a lot of this leg will be hidden, so you don't have to think about the logistics of it too much. But we do know that this foot should be flatter, and it's probably gonna come out a little bit more this way, because it almost looks like their body is turning. Now again, I am not an expert, I'm just doing my best. So this might not be the most accurate, but again, I have a pretty stylized way of drawing that I feel like doesn't warrant the most anatomically correct things. So there's a lot that I feel like I can get away with. But always my biggest tip is to just keep things loose and keep them curvy. I actually also feel like this knee is a little bit low. I think, let's see, let's bring it up just a little bit there. And then, oops, bring up the calf. I also do have a tendency to make legs quite long for my characters. That might be different for you. You might prefer shorter legs, that's totally fine. I think the thigh is generally like pretty close to the same length as the lower leg, if I'm not mistaken. Again, I'm not a doctor. I just like drawing pretty things. But for my characters, I usually keep them somewhat the same length, not including like the heel, or not including like the ankle and the foot. Okay, so that's feeling pretty decent for right now. And actually, now that I've drawn the legs, the arm doesn't feel too out of place. Sometimes that can kind of warp your view if you draw one feature and you haven't drawn the rest of the body. You're thinking, oh my god, that's way too big or way too small. Sometimes it helps to draw the rest of it. So let's go to this arm here. I'm thinking I'll probably, oops, and right about here. It kind of helps for me to draw like the very end of the arm itself at the wrist, right before the hand starts, like the palm of the hand starts. And that kind of helps me check the length of my arm as well, which this is feeling a little bit large. So I'm gonna go ahead and shrink it just a little bit. Okay. Because again, that arm is going backward and bending a bit, so it shouldn't be too long. Let's go ahead and flip this around again. And that's feeling pretty okay to me. This is a pretty tall character, I would say, so. And we'll just go ahead and draw like a little mitten again for the hand. Okay, that feels pretty good. That is a pretty good example of how my process works for drawing bodies. I don't know if it was the most helpful, but let's go ahead and jump to another pose and see if I can make it any more intelligible than this one was. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at this pose, which I'm actually gonna go ahead and flip. This one is not too different from the other one, and also not too different from the pose that we're working on our character. But this one is interesting because you're gonna see both legs, and it's a little bit of a side view. The body is kind of turned away from the viewer. So let's go ahead and turn the opacity down on that, make a new layer, and let's start with our neck, which again is gonna help us find the center of the body. So we're imagining that this is kind of the center line, right? Somewhere about there. We've got like some hips right here, top of the chest right there. Now, I wish I was the artist, the type of artist that does the blocks, because I feel like that's a very helpful way to draw anatomy. It doesn't really work for my brain. I think just because I found a process that works for me. But that could be a very useful way to get used to drawing anatomy, is if you start with these big block shapes, like you have a block for the rib cage here, and then you could have a block for the hips, and then you could start your bones for the legs and bring them down. That's a very helpful way of drawing anatomy. It's just not the way that I do it. I just go straight for the outlines. So I'm gonna go ahead and erase that and keep it pretty light here. I don't want to confuse my brain. So again, starting with the shoulders, I think I'm gonna have this one kind of come up. This sketch is a lot more messy than the other one that we worked with, so it's a little bit, it'll be more interesting to kind of see how we work with that and make up for the lack of proportionally accurate lines. Kind of just do my best. It's also very helpful to have a pretty general understanding of, obviously, human anatomy, but like the muscles underneath the skin in certain areas, because that can kind of help you figure out where you're going to have a little bit more definition and less definition. I'm going to redo that because that feels much too long. So this should be about the top of the arm, starting up here. So I know that there's usually quite a bit more muscle right here at the top of the forearm there. That's why I usually have a bit of a curve coming down into the bonier part of the forearm. And again, keeping the lines curved just a little bit rather than perfectly straight. There's also obviously quite a bit of muscle in the upper arm area, which I do usually like to kind of show by having a bit more of a curve here than elsewhere. And that still feels a little bit too long, but let's go ahead and draw the rest of the body. So, depending on the size of this character, their chest is kind of hiding quite a bit of the other arm. You'll likely see a bit of that shoulder anyway, but not much, not nearly as much as we're seeing on this side. I am gonna go ahead and send that over. Now, to me, it almost looks like this character is maybe leaning their back up against a wall and about to walk away, or maybe they're just leaning back casually, I don't know. They have quite a bit of a curve to their upper body here. So let's go ahead and find maybe that like bathing suit line to help us kind of find the end of the torso. Can also maybe find the belly button, that helps as well. Maybe something like that. Now for the booty, we know that there's a little bit more flesh there usually, and the upper thighs generally have quite a bit more muscle to them than the lower part of the legs, so I always make these parts extra curvy, at least in comparison to some of the other parts of the leg. Which, the back of your calf, you're gonna have quite a bit of muscle as well, so that also does need to curve quite a bit. Let's see. It does look like the weight is distributed pretty evenly for this character. Like, it does look like they are firmly planting their feet on the ground as compared to the other character where it was really just one leg kind of accounting for all of the weight. Let's go ahead and pretend to draw some feet. Maybe they're just very animated in a conversation and they're just kind of moving around a lot. Like, it looks like they're in the middle of moving around a lot. Now, I am gonna adjust this arm a little bit. In fact, I think I'm gonna go ahead and just redraw it rather than move it around because I'm not terribly happy with it. One thing that I like to do if I'm not super happy with how an arm is looking is just get rid of it, draw the rest of the body as if the arm is not there, and then all the way up to the shoulder. Now we know what the body looks like. Let's go ahead and add an arm here. I kind of add a circle here as if almost like this is a mannequin and we've just popped the arm off so I can get a better visual. So shoulder right about here, and I'm gonna bring it out a little bit more because this character seems to have their arm in a pocket. So it makes more sense for the arm to be a little bit further out. And again, I feel like I've made that bicep area a little bit too long, perhaps, maybe for my liking, especially because the shoulder is up a little bit, it's not super relaxed. So let's just make it a tiny bit shorter. That'll do. Not too much of a difference there. Don't want to make it too drastic of a change. And then there we go. That feels a little bit better. They kind of lost some muscle up here though. But that's okay, this doesn't have to be a super muscly character. Okay, so now I'm imagining they've got their hand in a pocket there. There's kind of our bathing suit line. Alright, so moving on over to this arm, which we're not going to see much of, which is sometimes nice, but also sometimes kind of tricky. Really figure out where that shoulder is at. So, imagining this is the shoulder and this is the end of the arm, that is going to be way too long. So let's go ahead and try that again. Sometimes it helps to even draw it behind the body. the most accurate, but oops, now let's go ahead and erase what we did there. And that feels a little funny. So just go with your gut. Maybe just bring it down just a little bit. And that feels a little bit better. And there we go. We've got another body. Okay. So now that I've done a couple example sketches, let's go ahead and jump back to the character that we've been working on and start drawing on that one. Alright, so we have our character here. We've got all of our hair, we've got our face, and we do have a little bit of a neck started here. Let's just go ahead and continue that neck on. And let's imagine that the other side of the neck is somewhere over here. Kind of work around the hair that we have already placed. Usually I do draw the body before I do the hair too much, or before I put too much thought into the hair, just because it can be a little tricky when you run into things like this where you're kind of trying to account for space that is hidden under the hair, and then it just kind of makes it unnecessarily difficult. But for the sake of this series making sense with the videos and the order that I make them in, I did the hair before the body. But generally, I would suggest doing the body first. Okay, so their arm is out. It's probably about as long as we want that to be, so let's bring it up a little bit, keeping this part pretty curved. Now, their body is kind of standing out, like the weight is mostly going to be on this leg, it looks like. And then this leg doesn't really have much weight on it. So this hip is really coming out quite a bit farther, but the legs are coming back inward. So I'm actually going to go ahead and just draw really loosely at first. Let's see. So I know that when we get to the clothes, her hand is going to be, well, I guess I could put her hand on her hip rather than in a pocket, but I kind of was envisioning it in a pocket. Not really sure yet. We'll decide in a little bit. Let's go ahead and do that kind of bathing suit line. And this hip is coming down more. In fact, maybe we want to bring that up just a bit more. And put a belly button here to kind of help us with the center. Now the legs are kind of turned toward the viewer, aside from maybe this one. I think this leg will be kind of turned this way, and then this one is turned so that the foot is kind of facing the viewer. So that means we want to draw both sides of the calf, so there's going to be quite a bit of curve here. We're going to curve inward toward the knee. Draw these two little half moons to kind of indicate that that is where the knee should be. And then I like to, when I'm drawing like a forward-facing foot placeholder, if you will, I kind of imagine that I'm drawing little duck feet, just like this weird little triangular shape. And then that, I mean, that looks like a foot that's probably facing you, right? Okay, and then this leg, again, is holding up most of the weight of the body. A bit of it is covered by the other leg, and we know that it's also turned. But we still want to keep it pretty curvy, even though it's in a straight position. Now, one thing that might make you feel a little better also, I'm realizing that the knee was much too low because the hip for this one starts just a little bit higher than over here, so that means the knee should also be a little bit higher. Right, just a little bit. Something like that. Now, something that might make you feel a little better is remembering that we will be putting clothes on these characters, so some of this will be hidden. So it doesn't have to be, so unless you're drawing this character in shorts, you don't have to be super worried about the finer details. Okay, you know, I think that'll do for now. Let's go back up to the arm here, which now that I've done the legs feel a bit too short, or it feels a bit too short. So let's add a little bit of length back. Is that too much length though? That's the question. I think it is, so bring that up a little bit. Also curve just a little bit. Now we're not really gonna see this arm. This arm is completely behind the body, which is kind of nice. That's one less thing for us to worry about. And I think I am gonna have the hands on the hips as opposed to in the pockets. That way we can kind of see a hand over here. But again, we're not drawing them yet, so don't have to worry about that. I am gonna bring this forearm down just a little bit more. Oops, let's erase this again. And just draw a placeholder hand for now. I'm gonna add a little bit more curve up here. Okay. It's getting pretty close to where we want it, I think. Okay, I think I like that now. That length for the arm. Okay. I think that's pretty good. We have a good indication of where we want the hands to be, where the feet will be. You know, actually, looking at her now though, I don't think I love how long the thigh is here. So I'm actually gonna move them up just a little bit. And then kind of fix this. It's just feeling a little bit too long. Again, I have a tendency to draw really long legs. Okay, that feels a little bit better. Still pretty long, but maybe she is a tall character. Maybe if I just move the knee up a little bit like that, and that means I should move this knee up. Okay, that feels better. We might even adjust when we start adding clothes. There's no point in the drawing process where you have to say, too late, that's what I drew, so I have to stick with it. I've even been looking at the face and wanting to tweak some things, so once we have the final sketch, we can kind of look at it as a whole and decide if there's anything that we want to change. And don't feel bad about that, because that's, again, just part of the process. It's all about drawing until you're happy with it. Because whether you're working traditionally or digitally, you have an eraser. That is what an eraser is for. There is no reason for you to feel bad about erasing things. It's all just part of the process. But that is all that I have for you guys today. Hopefully you got something useful out of this video, or at the very least, I hope it was enjoyable to watch. And I will see you all in the next video, where we're gonna jump into hands and feet, which is everybody's favorite, yay. But until then, bye-bye!